So this provides a good little segue, is that we had a recording of a webinar that was done by our past chair, Bonnie Dahl, but that was done back in 2018, before the council was able to have had a Zoom account and able to record ourselves. So therefore, so it required a third party being involved in the recording. And so the Department of Education was kind enough to lend us their software called Blackboard Collaborate to record the session. Problem is the recording lived on their servers. So when the link on our website broke, and not to get too technical, it just went away. And getting it back was difficult. So, and seeing it was 2018 when the last recording was made, we just decided that we would redo the recording, have it live on our servers, so we would have control over if it's where it goes and when it is live. So I'm just going to go through this, back through this. It's so this is for the IGP, the Institutional Grants Program. The committee is responsible there, and then we'll pick up with the slide 4. The presentation will be about an hour and a half. There will be time at the end for questions. I'm hoping that this webinar will be pretty thorough, and so hopefully you won't have too many questions at the end, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have at that time. So if you can, if you can hold your questions till the end, your question may be answered later in the presentation.
Okay, we just had Alice join as well, Kim. Alice,
okay, welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Alice. So beginning is for your institution to be eligible for IGP, your institution must meet all of the following criteria. 1, be an archive or an institution that has archival material as part of their collection. I like to say everybody has an archive, so they just may not call themselves an archive. We go from libraries. We, as our membership, we have libraries, museums, historical societies, and like in the case of Luther Care, it's a corporate archives and things like that. 2, be accessible to the public, even if it's by appointment. If I can walk up to a front desk and make an appointment to see the archival material, we would be, it doesn't mean that I have view of everything that's available that you have. There are restrictions for sure, but if I'm able to access some of the archival material that you have in your collection, you would be considered accessible to the public. Number 3 is to be an institutional or developmental member in good standing for both the years of application and the year the project happens. So we're in fiscal year 2024-2025 right now. So to apply, you would need to be a member in good standing. But also the application is for the fiscal year 2025-2026. So you would also need to be a member for the year that next year, as the project takes place. and also have no delinquent reports from past SCAA grant funding. This is I say this is Gloria's rule because she's the one who keeps track of all the reports, just not for the IGP. We're looking at other grant programs that SCAA runs, being the Archives Week grants and the Professional Development Fund that we run as well.
And I don't do that out of autonomy. The reason for that is that we also have to account to our funders, SAS Culture, SAS Lotteries, about any grants that are dispersed. So we have to be accountable. So the final interim reporting comes in about midway through the grant year, and then there's a final report that's due by the end of May. So that's the reason for needing those reports.
Correct. Thank you, Larry. And we'll touch on that later again as well. So if your institution meets all the criteria, and then the next question is, what sorts of things can you apply for under IGP? The most important element you must keep in mind when deciding whether you can apply for IGP is that your must be a quote unquote project. The IGP will only fund projects, archival projects. So which begs the question, what is a project? So a project is a temporary activity that has a defined start and end date and has measurable deliverables. This means that institutions cannot apply for funding from the IGP to cover ongoing operational costs for their institution. We'll go through some examples of requests that are projects and requests that are operational costs, just to illustrate the difference between the two. So in our first example here, we have project funding, or well, I gave it away there. Project funding for salary of a temporary employee is to be hired for the set number of weeks to work on a specific project or a specific collection. The operational would be a request for funding for the salary of a permanent full-time staff member who works on a particular collection. We're looking for, because this is a yearly fund, the allocation is based on the fiscal year. We're looking for a finite time period, where a full-time employee is an ongoing payment. Funding to purchase Hollinger boxes and file folders to rehouse a specific collection, and funding to purchase Hollinger boxes for file folders to use as needed through the year. The first one is a project, second is operational funding. We're looking at providing supplies for a specific collection that you're working on. You see the term Hollinger boxes. You might be familiar with bankers boxes, shoe boxes. They could be fruit boxes, but Hollinger boxes are archivally acid-free food boxes that we use. Example 3, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. The operational is funds to purchase a scanner to replace one which is used for scans of photographs for clients when they order reproductions. The project funding is to purchase a scanner to digitize the specific photograph collection. Now, this is to say that once the project is finished, doesn't mean the scanner goes away. You can hold on to the scanner and it'll become the operational part of your operational function. but we want to see that the project, we're purchasing the scanner for the completion of the project. An example for is a project would be to fund the construction of a new website. And so that would be the finite contract of somebody to come up with graphics and things for the website, the design of the website. The operational part would be the yearly fees to host a website. If you host it, if someone, you contract with a company to hold on to the stuff for perpetuity, that would be operational funds. Okay. Another requirement for project to be eligible to be funded by IGP is that the project must focus primarily on archival materials held by the institution. Um, Archival records would include textual records, graphic records, cartographic records, architectural plans, audio recordings, moving images, and digital records. Examples of these textual records would be like letters, um, diaries, journals, etc. In some cases, newsprint. Graphic materials, we're talking about photographs, slides, negatives, cartographic, are maps. Architectural plans and drawings, pretty straightforward there. Audio recordings, mostly we're dealing with oral histories, but we have in some cases in Saskatchewan, we're lucky enough that we have the Diefenbaker collection. He's one of the only he is the only prime minister to have his collection held outside of Ottawa. And they have, it's held at the U of S, the University of Saskatchewan collections, special collections, and they have recordings of all his speeches in the House. So we were able to partially fund the digitization of those recordings. Moving images, we're talking usually their home movies, Super 8 films, things like that. We are able to, smaller institution was able to contract with to have their Super 8 home movies digitized. She had them done. She then was able to upload the digitized copies to her YouTube channel, and now they are linked to MemorySask. And so that is a great little project that she was able to accomplish. And digital records are just emails, digital photographs. You'll hear the term born digital records. Those are like this PowerPoint is a born digital record. It's something that has not been in physical form. It's required to have another machine, or well, in this case, a computer to gain access to the information. Oops. One question that we get frequently is that can I use the funding for a project that works primarily with artifacts or published materials? The answer is generally no. There are museum grants that deal with that. And IGP is pretty much focused on our archival records of the province. This is not to say that artifacts and published materials can't be included as part of a project. However, the focus of the project should remain on the archival records. For example, let's say an institution applied for the funding to purchase supplies to rehouse the John Smith Hall. The John Smith Vault includes medals and trophies in addition to his diaries and photographs. The institution could include supplies for rehousing those medals and trophies in their application as part of their project to rehouse the whole collection. However, if the institution was applying to rehouse only the medals and trophies, this would not be eligible. For published materials, the institution must demonstrate in their application that the published materials are in some way unique or rare. For example, if an institution has a collection of old newspapers from 1910 and there are no other copies of that newspaper available elsewhere, the collection would be eligible for funds. Another example that I have is that uh, we collect the records of someone who's creating this PowerPoint, and uh, I've highlighted and made notes in a book to include this in my PowerPoint presentation. That automatically makes that, even though it's published, that book becomes archival material. It has a link to parts of the collection, so um, we can deal with that. When you're designing your project, remember that the purpose of the IGP is to fund projects that support at least one of the following activities related to archives. Number one, arrangement description. These activities involve what archivists call processing a collection. This includes activities such as sorting the materials, rehousing the materials in new folders or boxes, labeling file folders, writing descriptions, or creating finding aids. Number two, uh, conservation. Uh, these are activities to help preserve the records, pretty straightforward there. Number three is the digitization. This includes the scanning of material, either for preservation or outreach purposes, like creating an exhibit or things like that. And then outreach are projects to promote your archives that could include websites, exhibits, or events. And number five, accessibility of archival records. These are activities that help to make the records available to researchers. This includes outreach work, processing a collection, adding materials to the memory SAS database. Make sure your project would fit in one of these five categories. Now we're going to go talk about completing your application for the IGP. On the application form, section A is primarily basic contact information. If an institution is submitting more than one application, which they can do, they should indicate their preferred priority for each application. Would it be one of two, two of two, so on. Applicants also need to indicate that if the IG funds are being used for a match or a matching funds project, and if yes, then applicants must indicate which granting program the IGP would be matched to. Most of our applications are for Young Canada Works, but there are other programs out there that you can apply to. Section B has three areas: the project description, the timeline, and the budget. We're going to go through each section one by one, starting with the project description. Project description is the section where you describe your proposed project to the archives or the grants committee. The specific information required by the committee in this section to assess your to assess your request depends on what you're applying for. However, there are a few pieces of information that will be required for all applicants. This is on page 2 of the package you're able to download off the from the members tab in the funding programs section on the web page. So for almost all applicants, your project will involve a particular collection or collections in your holdings. It is critical that you provide complete information for every collection that will be worked on as part of your project. Please just don't link to a description of the collection on your website or in Memory Sask. Again, the grants committee is looking through several applications, so providing collection information as they need in your application is appreciated. They're volunteers, and to have to link to go find the information is perturbing to some folks. So in your project description, you must include the following information for every collection. One, the name of the collection. Oh, there we go. There we go. Sorry, I'm behind there. A short description of the records, which includes the date range, the significance, type of material, content of the material, provenance, and diversity component. Again, this description does not need to be long. You just need to give the grants committee a basic idea of what the records are. And number 3, and probably most important for working with the timeline, which just informs the budget as well, is the extent and size of the collection. So here is an example of a collection description. I'm in the script, it says read the example. I'm not going to fully read the example just for time's sake. As you can see, the collection descriptions do not need to be long, but they do need to include those specific pieces of information to help the committee assess the application. So you just may, I will comment the B&W photographs. That just refers to black and white. Of all the information applicants provide for each collection, the extent is often the most important information that the grants committee needs to assess your project. It is critical that the extent is accurate and follows the archival measurement standards. Do not provide your measurements in number of boxes. Again, as I mentioned before, they could be bankers boxes, Hollinger boxes, shoe boxes, fruit boxes. You know, I've seen all sorts, and so it is important to standardize the measurement of our cutting material. Do not provide your measurements as a percentage of the total of your holdings. The committee has no idea how large your collection is. So the percentage of your collection is not pertinent to them. Do not include photographs of the boxes on the shelves as accent figures. We've had this happen before, and where I mean, it's easy to just take your iPhone in and snap pictures of the stuff you want to work with, but again, yeah, I mean, it doesn't give us uh, doesn't let us know the full extent of the material you're working with. So instead, we'll use these standard measurements to show the committee the standard size of the collection. Um, for textual materials or documents, uh, they should be described in linear meters. Do not describe them in feet or inches. Everything's metric. Um, if materials are boxes, generally measure the width of the box and then add the measurements of the boxes together to come up with a total extent. Excuse me. Uh, if the box is just partially filled, we ask that you would remove the loose papers. Um, for materials that are loose in folders or loose pages, measure the thickness of the folder or the stack of pages. You can see what we are measuring the loose documents the same way we measured the boxes. For photographs, negatives, slides, maps, and architectural plans, they should be described in the number of items. This doesn't mean that you must count 30 boxes of photographs to get an exact number. You can provide an estimate based on counting a portion of the collection and extrapolating. In some cases, it's easy to just, I have 75 maps, easy to count. But if I have over 6,000 negatives, I'm not sitting and counting all 6,459 negatives. For audio and moving images, they should be measured in hours or minutes, in addition to the number of cassettes and, if applicable, discs like CDs and DVDs and things like that. If your measurements don't follow these standards, for example, you describe textual records and the number of items, or you describe the photographs in linear meters, uh, be sure to include an explanation of why you've made this decision on measurements in your application. Please remember, though, that these would be very unusual collections. It's best to try and stick to the standard guidelines. And if you are unsure how to measure materials in your collection, I am here to lend my assistance in your decision making. So a few final comments about collection extents. Yeah, it is critical that these measurements are provided clearly and accurately. Your application will be assessed by the committee using these measurements, so it's important that the extents you provide match the funds or materials you are requesting. For example, if an institution requests 5,000 sheets of Mylar sleeves for photograph collection, but it is in the project description is indicated that there are only 100 photographs, it is unlikely the committee will approve that request. The rest of the information you need to provide in the project description section will depend on the nature of your request. We will go through some of the most common application types so you can see what information the grants committee will be looking for. Probably the most common request the grants committee receives is for materials such as college boxes, file folders, mylar photo sleeves. These are some of the things to be aware of when you project for a supply request. First, the supplies you request must match the extent uh, of the collection you're planning to work on. For example, if an institution is rehousing a collection of 500 photograph prints into photograph sleeves, the grants committee will approve a supply request for 500 photograph sleeves. Now, I just want to make a mention that, you know, some vendors, the package of mylar sleeves might come in, you know, uh, packages of 200. So if you say 300, which is 600, we're going to approve that. We understand that this is what you have, so we're going to go with that. And so, but even though if you order you have 500 photographs and you order 200 packages of 200, we're going to only approve 3 of the 4 because institutions can't request supplies for general use. So also make sure that the supplies you request match the content of the collection being worked on. For example, if you request funding for boxes to store oversized items, make sure that you have indicated the extent of those oversized items in your project description. And thirdly, the supplies requested must also match your project. Of course, an example of this would be request for a magnifying glass. If an institution is doing description work that needs the magnifying glass to read small print or detail on the photograph, magnifying glass would likely be an eligible expense. However, if the institution is simply refoldering and reboxing a collection, magnifying glass likely would not be approved item. You don't need a magnifying glass to just move to a new folder. If you're applying for funding for a specialty item, such as a device that heats up and removes tape, be sure to include some indication of whether anyone on your staff has training to use these devices. The grants committee generally will not approve requests for certain types of specialty implements unless they are satisfied someone on staff knows how to use them. We use the example of the tape remover because it was just a volunteer institution that had requested it, and they were actually just they didn't have any staff member who knew how to use it, so we were worried that there would be damage to the records. If you're requesting specialized conservation equipment, such as temperature or humidity controls, the grants committee will generally want to see documentation from the conservator that this equipment is needed and that staff are trained to use this equipment. If you request computer equipment like scanners, the grants committee will look at the collection you are working with and will assess whether the scanner you have requested will meet the needs of your project and the type of material. For example, if you want a large scanner to scan panoramic photographs, you must indicate how many of the oversized photographs you will be scanning as part of your project. And for computer computer equipment, you should also clearly indicate why you need a new computer to complete this project. For example, an institution might indicate that they have only one computer, and when they hire the summer student, they will need a second desktop computer for the student to scan and describe um, the collection. You must provide a current quote from a vendor, and this is most important because a lot of people will forget this step. Um, Usually you can just do a screenshot of your shopping cart um, uh, if you're ordering online, or other vendors that we've dealt with, specifically Car McLean. They're used to providing quotes um, to and to folks, and so are set up for that. Um, so including for all items being purchased, this includes large scale items such as shelving or map cabinets, as well as miscellaneous items. One year we had an applicant who was going to interview Indigenous elders and needed to get funding for to buy tobacco for their. So they had to submit either a quote or a receipt for the exact cost of the tobacco. Uh, do not round your request to the nearest even dollar. The IGP will fund exactly the costs of the items. This is why we require quotes for all purchases. In addition, be aware that the grants committee members may go onto a website and see exactly which items you are ordering and how much they cost. Also be cognizant of that the taxes and shipping costs are eligible expenses to be sure, and to be sure you include them in your request for funds. Um, we've gone back several times to make sure that's included. Uh, one year, quite a few years back now, they ordered a map cabinet but didn't include the shipping costs. And so when the map cabinet arrived, it actually it arrived from the U.S. And so the shipping costs were quite substantial, and so were almost just as much as the purchase of the map cabinet itself. But we would have covered that if they had requested it. The next most common request received is funding to pay for salaries. Uh, Institutions can apply for funds to either hire someone on contract or to temporarily increase a part-time employee's hours. If you're increasing an existing part-time employee's hours, you must state explicitly in the project description of your application, and the increased hours must be devoted solely to the project. Reminder that the IGP will not fund salaries for full-time employees. If you have requested funding for staff salaries, you should include a brief outline of the tasks to be performed by the staff person who is being funded. Finally, if you're hiring staff to do arrangement description work, you should indicate in your project description that you will be uploading the descriptions to MemorySask. Another common request we've been getting is that for renovations of their storage areas. The grants committee will require either a global assessment or a letter from a conservator indicating that the renovations being proposed are required and appropriate. Renovation work is like ordering supplies. The committee will need quotes from the vendors and the contractors. This is one of the few types of applications where the grants committee does not require that you list the collections being worked on as part of the project. It's just assumed that your full holdings will be affected. Tips for digitization projects. You should indicate if the materials are being digitized for preservation purposes, accessibility purposes, or both. If the digitization is for preservation purposes, you should indicate why you need to digitize the item. For example, the item is fragile, there are conservation concerns such as mold, or it is in an obsolete format, and so forth. You must also indicate how you plan to store your digital preservation copies, even if you aren't asking for the funding of that storage. But that storage is eligible for funding. You will uh, provide funding for the purchase of external hard drives and whatnot. Um, uh, but again, you have to be conscious of annual fees for cloud storage, things like that, because those will not be eligible if they're annual fees. If the digitization is for accessibility purpose, this usually means that you are planning to upload materials to the internet. In your project description, you should indicate if there are any copyright concerns with the items and if those have been dealt with. The grants committee does not want to fund a digitization project and then find out in the end that the institution has no permission to upload the material to the internet. And a little side here, we do have a copyright workshop coming up in October. You can sign up off the webpage. A little plug for SCAA there. You must also indicate how your digitization project will contribute to memory SAS. And you can contact me. We can work through what would be the best way of uploading for you to the database. You probably noticed at this point that the grants committee puts a great deal of emphasis on all the various numbers with an application precisely matching each other, which begs the question is why is the grants committee so fussy? And Gloria touched on this a little bit earlier. For the collection extent and supplies requested, the time spent on the project, the salary dollars all must match exactly. The grants committee doesn't do this to be difficult. The numbers must be correct and the project must be feasible because the SCAA is accountable to SAS Culture and Lotteries Fund for how the IGP money is allocated. It is the responsibility of the grants committee to ensure that all the grants that they recommend for approval meet the criteria and purposes of the IGP. The grants committee takes this responsibility very seriously, and members carefully assess the details of each application to ensure that all the money is being granted fairly and responsibly. So we're just not being difficult just for the hell of it. There's a purpose behind our concerns. Now we'll move on to the timeline in section B. In the timeline section, you outline the work plan for your project, including the start and end date. Even applications where their institution is only ordering supplies, timeline must be submitted. The name timeline is a bit misleading, but for some applications, particularly those for arrangement description projects and digitization projects. For these applications, the committee does not need to know what the staff person is going to be working on week to week during the project. The committee simply needs to know what the total days are going to be for the project. The project time guidelines document is a critical tool for calculating the total hours for arrangement, description, or digitization projects. This document is available on the SCAA website under the Members tab and under the Funding Programs section under that tab. The Grants Committee uses these guidelines and this document to assess your application. So it's important that institutions understand and use these guidelines properly. When calculating the time for an arrangement and description project, these guidelines will help you estimate how long it will take for each phase of the arrangement and description process. Keep in mind that each of these arrangement and description tasks have been artificially separated in the guidelines to make it easier for archivists to calculate a time estimate for your project. We won't do each step in isolation from the other. So, for instance, this means that staff person won't complete all the arrangement tasks on a collection, and then when that is fully finished, do the description tasks, and when that is fully finished, do the physical processing tasks. When your staff person is doing the work, he or she will be doing these tasks concurrently. Um, these tasks have merely been separated in the guidelines to help archivists calculate the time in a standard way. You will find that if you are applying for funding from another archival institution or archival granting program, like the Documentary Heritage Communities Program, DHCP, they will be using the same guidelines. So it's important to understand how to apply them. The first step to building your timeline is to find the extents you provided in your project description section for each type of material in the collection. Then you go to the guidelines to see what the recommended times are for each phase of the arrangement and description work for the time type of record that you're working with. If you're planning to fully process a collection, the Grants Committee will expect to see all these steps accounted for in your timeline. So we'll run through an example using our Wayne family phone that we have. This example of a timeline for an arrangement description project for a collection of textual records. You can see why it's important to use the standard archival measurements we were talking about early on, because the textual records estimate meters per day for calculations. This is all that is required for the timeline section for an arrangement description project. This is an example of a timeline for arrangement and description project for a collection of photographs. Again, photograph extent is described in items because the estimates we use is images per day for the calculations. But of course, most collections are not made up of a single format of material. So this is an example of a collection that has both textual records and photographs You can see that we don't try to combine the two types of material separately. Um, you estimate each type of material separately for appraisal, arrangement, description, and physical processing work. You add the time for the background research and the finding aid production for the collection, and as a whole, and then add the days together to find the total project time. Now we're going to go through each step of creating a timeline and estimate for arrangement description projects so that you can see how we can build these timelines. First step is a background research. This is the time spent researching the history of the collection and or the individual organization that is being worked on. The guidelines allow between 1 and 5 days for this work. The estimate is not dependent on the size of the collection, but how much information you gather about the creator or the font or the collection. So our example institution will start building their timeline. They have decided that they need 2 days to do the background research. So they write that on the first line of their timeline. The first phase is appraisal. This phase includes time spent on selection, physical evaluation, and or preliminary shorting. However, when you include time for appraisal, this usually means that you're planning to the collection. If you include time for appraisal, the grants committee will generally require an explanation as to how much you think you will reduce the collection. And then the number should be reflected in the subsequent processing steps, as you'll see as we go forward. Remember that the committee is made up of archivists, and they realize that you won't exactly know how much you will reduce the collection by until you work with it. So we're understanding of that project. They are just looking for an estimate of how much material might be removed. To determine the time spent on appraisal, you will look at the guidelines, the project time guidelines, and select the description that best matches the collection you'll be working on. In this case of the Wayne family phone, the collection needs a bit of sorting and reduction. So our institution has selected 1.5 meters per day rate. So going back to building our timeline, we now write down the total size of the collection and divide it by the selected appraisal rate that we just did. And this gives us a number of days for the appraisal, which will be added to the timeline. Our next step will be arrangement. This phase accounts for the time spent to create order out of materials in the collection. The less organized the material is, the higher the time will be. To determine the time spent on the arrangement, look at the arrangement guidelines. And in the case of our example collection, the material is in files, but there is work to be done to put the files in order. So the institution has selected the rate of 1 meter per day. Going back to our building our timeline, we now enter the size of the collection and divide it by 1 and 1 meter per day and to determine the number of days for arrangement. Remember, if you indicated that you will be reducing the size of the collection in the appraisal step, the committee will expect to see a smaller collection size in the following stages of your estimate. The committee understands that this reduced number is an estimate And so make the best guess you can based on what you know of the collection. It's usually better to err on the high side, meaning estimating less material removed from the collection rather than more. Our next step is description. This step accounts for the time spent writing the file descriptions, labeling the folders, creating series, writing series level descriptions, as well as numbering files and items. Um, to determine the time spent on description, you'll look at the guidelines outlined. In the case of the example collection, uh, the description information won't require excessive work, so the institution has selected the rate of 1.5 meters per day. And so looking at our our timeline, we add the description work by entering the reduced size of the collection and dividing by 1.5 meters to determine the amount of days needed. So our next step is the physical processing. This step accounts for the physical part of the work that includes tasks such as refoldering documents, putting folders into boxes, labeling those folders, putting maps into oversized folders, into filing cabinets, flattening the items, putting the photos in mylar sleeves, and removing paper clips, etc., etc., etc. To determine this time spent on physical processing, look at the physical processing guidelines. In this case of our example collection, the institution feels there was quite a bit of reboxing and refoldering work to do, so that they have selected 1.5 meters per day. So going back to our timeline, uh, we add the physical processing work by entering the reduced size, dividing by 1.5 to determine the number of days required for the physical processing. Our final component would be the finding aid production. This is the time spent compiling the description and background research into a RAD compliant finding aid. RAD for those is Rules for Archival Description. That's a whole other workshop. So we can even on things like that. The grants committee will be looking for institutions to include time spent creating a finding aid on the timeline, since that is the result of all the arrangement description work that you're doing. So to determine the time spent on the finding aid production, you look at the final extent of the collection, and the size in our example is 4.5. So looking at the chart, the institution can select either 3 or 4 days for finding aid production. In this case, the institution felt that 4 days would be required. And so in building out their timeline, so to finish the timeline, they add the finding aid production time to the rest of the estimates and add them together. If the institution is fully processing the collection, this would be sufficient for a timeline. The institution would simply add up the number of days for each activity, and the total would be the total number of days for the project. So, so in our example, it works out to 20 days. For a photograph collection would work the same way as the textual example we just did. Just simply use the project time guidelines to determine the number of days for each step of the process. Remember that photograph collections are estimated by number of items per day and not by meter per day. So if there is a digitalization component, in addition to other arrangement description work, you will find scanning time guidelines in the document as well. The standard guideline for digitalization is 10 minutes per item for projects that do not require selection, which means you are scanning all the items. If selection is required, meaning you are choosing only certain items to scan, then standard is approximately 50 minutes per item. My example for this is that uh, you have someone who was the city of Saskatoon contracted a photographer to document the construction of the Broadway Bridge. But apparently he was paid by the roll of film. So he took like 20 photographs of concrete being poured over rebar. And so instead of scanning all 20 of those photographs, the city archives decided that they picked the best 3 photos out of those 20 and scan just those 3. So that would require a little longer to do some selection. This is an example of the photograph collection timeline, where the institution is planning to fully process and the collection and scan all the images that are in the collection. They have selected the rate of 50 images per day because they are scanning all of the images. So if your institution is only digitizing material, meaning that you're scanning items that are already arranged and described, then you can just use the scanning guidelines alone and to build your estimate. In this example, the institution will be scanning all the prints and negatives of this collection. So they have used the estimate of 50 images per day for their timeline. So their total project time is 105 days. In this case, the institution will not uh, won't, uh, won't be doing any arrangement or description work. They just scanning the images. Keep in mind that if your estimates for any of these steps are extremely high or low compared to the project time guidelines document, you will need to justify them in your project. One type of application that would be used the traditional timeline rather than a total days estimate would be an outreach activity. For example, a project to create a physical or virtual exhibit would be broken down into weeks or months of work based on the tasks involved to complete the project. And so our final part of the section B is the budget section. In this section, you need to outline the expected costs and revenues for the project. In addition to indicating the IGP funds as revenue, you should also indicate any other other sources of funding for your project, such as direct or in-kind funding, especially if the IGP funds won't cover all the expenses of the project. In-kind funding refers to current staff or existing resources. For salaries, be sure to include the hourly rate and working hours per day for a hired staff person, including any benefits. The grants committee will do the math to make sure that the total amount requested matches the project days outlined in the timeline section of your application. This example of what a salary request could look like. The information can be provided and formatted in whatever way makes sense for your institution, but the basic information shown here should be included. In this example, remember our timeline determined that the total project time would be 20 days. So the institution would be requesting a grant of $3,699.18 to pay for an archival assistant to process the Wayne family phone. For supply requests, you can simply write the total of the budget in your budget, but don't forget to attach the quotes from the vendors. If you're requesting funding for both supplies and salary, you can include both in the budget summary as well as you see the example shown here. But remember that you must show how you're determined the salary figure, and you must provide quotes from the vendors and supply requests. I'm going to keep repeating that because that's very important. So yeah, you can use the IGP funds as part of a match for another grant, such as Young Canada Works. If you wish to do this, you must provide 2 timelines and 2 budgets in your application. One for your institution only, if your institution only receives the IGP, and one for if your institution receives both grants. You probably won't know if you have the funding for the other grant at the time of submission for the IGP. So that's why we require both. In other words, the grants committee wants to know what you will get done if you get the matching funds, and what you will get done if you don't. You do not need to include 2 timelines and 2 budgets if the additional funds are coming from your own institution and not an external granting agency. If the additional funds are are certain, usually because they are coming from your institution, you only need to do 1 timeline and 1 budget. However, if you're applying for additional funds from another source, which are uncertain at the time you apply for the IGP, you must include the 2 budgets and 2 timelines. Both timelines and budgets requests must be the same amount of money from the IGP. The grants committee can only approve an application for 1 amount. So this is a very simple example of what a matching funds request could look like. Of course, there is only an example of the budget section of the application form, and so the project description and timeline sections would also need to outline the differences between the 2 versions of the project. In this example, if the institution receives funding from both the IGP and the other agency, they will digitize an entire photograph collection. In the second budget, they show that if they only receive the IGP, they only digitize a portion of the photographs. And notice that the amount requested in both budgets for the IGP is identical. So the final section of the application, a form is the checklist. The checklist is a tool to help you ensure that you have provided all the information that the grants committee will require to assess your application. I hope this webinar answered many of your questions, but there are several resources that can be helpful when writing your application. You will find these on in the member funding programs page under the members tab of our website, of the SCAA website. The committee, we would strongly recommend that you consult these resources when you are writing the application for your IGP. The first resource is the actual guidelines document. That's basically what this webinar was based on, but it is available as a downloadable PDF off our webpage under the members tab and funding programs page. The document goes through most of the questions that applicants have about the institutional grants program. It's a good place to start. The second one is the actual adjudication guidelines document. This is basically what the grants committee will be looking at and when we're assessing your application. So it's good to review to have an idea of what the committee will be looking for when they assess your application. Third one is the time guidelines, project timelines, as we are focusing on there for quite a bit. This is a critical document if you're planning to do any records processing or scanning as part of your request. Less so for supply requests. And the final one that I think there was one sentence about the diversity plan. So I didn't have time today to discuss what the diversity component of the grant is today in today's presentation. But again, it's downloadable as a PDF form off our website, the same members tab in the funding programs page. And the final resource is myself. So I am more than happy to answer any of your questions at any time that you need when applying for this program, for the IGP program. Thank you. And I will be glad to take any questions.
Hi, Cameron. It's Melody from Luther Care.
Yes.
First off, apologies for the tech problems we were having in the first part of your webinar.
Oh, that's okay.
June and
It's recorded, so it'll be up on the webpage eventually.
Pardon me. Okay, Junalyn and I are here listening to this webinar, and we are very interested in applying for a grant and have questions that are pretty specific to us. So would it be possible just to schedule a meeting with you so that we could run through those with you just one-on-one?
For sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll be in contact then.
Yeah, you can contact me anytime. You're one of the ones that are on my hit list for a site visit anyway. So
oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. I will stop sharing my screen here.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's Carla from Métis Local 43. How many IGP grants are awarded?
Anywhere between 10 and 15 usually. Depending on the requests, of course. I mean, you can make a request for the full $5,000 limit we have, but some folks just want to buy some boxes and folders, and so we do not need the full $5,000. So depending on the requests we receive. So. I see in the chat. Alice, did I answer your question about where you can download?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Well, either that means that you're totally confused, or that it was a Gloria, you're muted.
There we go. I say there was a lot of information packed into that hour and a half. So
Yes, exactly. So you can
yeah.
either you can download all the information I have from the webpage. And again, you can this webinar will probably in the next few days or maybe next week will be up to the webpage as well.
And if anyone has any questions regarding their memberships or renewals or anything like that, feel free to contact me as well. I'll put my email address in the chat here.
Sure. Very well. Well, I can sit here. We'll sit here for a while. If you formulate any questions, I will be here to answer them. Otherwise, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Cam, I have a question.
Yes,
You had said that the maximum is 5,000. Is there a minimum?
there is not. No,
Okay,
I believe the smallest we've is $400, and it was just for environmental monitor piece of equipment.
okay, so the things you had touched on about were the most common things that people submit a grant for. Could you revisit that?
Sure.
You
The
had
most common
mentioned like getting
is
supplies.
supplies is the most common one.
Okay,
I'm just going back into my script to make sure I'm not fibbing. Yeah, so the most common one we have is supplies. So that's the purchase of acid-free folders. If you have a photograph collection, it's the purchase of Mylar sleeves, those clear plastic sleeves for your photographs. In Hollander boxes, which are the gray archival boxes.
okay,
And that's the most common one. Second one is second frequent one is the purchase of or not the purchase, but the funding of salaries or the hiring of, like for instance, a summer student to work on a project. So you would outline a project that you want to get done, and then you would say, all right, we're going to hire this person for the length of the project. Here's the salary. If they do receive any benefits, include that, things like that. And the third one, why? Oh, is the creation of doing an outreach work. It's the creation of a web page or a virtual exhibit or even a physical exhibit using the archival material that you have. For instance, we would pay for the scanning of photographs to be used in a physical exhibit, things like that. And when I say scanning of photographs, you can, of course, scan a letter. I always say that there never should be any archival material on display at a museum. The scanning technology is so great now that you should any archival material used in a museum display should be a scan or a copy. And so the original would live in their acid-free folder away in the dark.
Okay.
Would I be right, Cam, in adding as part of equipment, I recall seeing like shelving units and map cases?
Oh yeah, yeah. I included that in like in my mind anyway. It would be supplies. But we have purchased map cabinets and shelving, things like that for folks to use.
Thank you so much.
It's Carla again. The due date, I'm looking in my calendar and I see the due date as October 4th, and my email says it's had too many problems to open. So can I just confirm that date, please?
Yeah, that I can confirm. Yes, October 4th. And a little inside here is that usually people will apply, like submit by October 4th. The committee, of course, doesn't get together. They review all the submissions in October. Then they will actually have an adjudication meeting in November. After which, a lot of times they will come back with questions for clarification to the applicants, and then in December you would answer those questions, and hopefully, knock on wood, you would know by the end of the year if you're successful or not, or they might come back with more questions, and so. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Gloria, but the checks are not distributed until the fiscal April 1st of the new year.
That's right.
So you have that extra time to. The reason we give this this leeway is that we are working with a volunteer committee, and we're also working around holidays, and we're also cognizant that if you are applying to another grant agency, that their deadline might be slightly different. So it's to be a benefit that you have this money coming. So when filling out their application.
Hi, it's Brenda again from Melfort.
Sure.
Just wanting to clarify, so the timelines for the project are April 1st to March 31st? Is that correct?
Oh, I see. Yeah, the fiscal year.
For the year?
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, our fiscal year is the April 1st to March 31st, the next. So
Thank you.
yeah, 25, 26. Yeah, sorry. I've been at this 15 years and I still get my dates confused.
So within that time frame, so the project is, as you say, April 1st to March 31st. In October would come an interim report, which is just a short, it's a brief reporting, just to kind of give us a status of where your project is at, if you're having any problems, you know, if something crucial happens that you won't be able to complete the project. Then the final report is due by May 31st of the following year, which is after the year end. However, we give you time from that year end of March 31st to May 31st, just to get the final report done. So
Correct. Yeah,
if
the
there's,
funding,
yeah.
funding would need to be spent by the end, before the 31st, but the final report isn't due until the end of May.
Right. And if you're done your report, your project early, of course, you can submit a final report at any time. If it's done as early as October, you can waive the interim report and just submit the final report. But yeah, so one more thing I want to mention, Cam, if you do come across any issues where you cannot complete your project, you have to let us know as soon as possible so that we can, you know, adjust the, if there's any refund of the fund of the IGP, that we can do that before our year end of March 31st. Hopefully not, and that doesn't happen very often at all, but just, I thought I'd mention that just in case, because sometimes, especially, you know, during things like COVID, sometimes projects are not able to be completed, but we try and be as lenient as possible.
Yeah, the interim report is a fairly new thing we brought in. It was a result of somebody who made the application, was approved, but then retired the next year. And all the work was just piled on her successor's desk. And so this was not, the successor was not aware of this project. So when they were informed of it, the timelines were constrained. But to your point that the final report can be made at any time, I think the earliest we've had a final report is after they received the check. They've done it was a supply purchase, so they ordered their supplies, got their supplies, and so did their final report in May. So, so add further confusion to us with the final reports for the year before weren't even due when this final report came in. So, yeah, yeah, for supply purchases, it's not necessary to, your project can be done wham bam quickly like that.
And one other thing I want to mention, and then I will be quiet, Cam, sorry.
So
I recall a few years ago, we had a project which was not eligible, and that was, I believe, Cam, a book publishing. Is that correct?
this is yeah, I hesitated to I was going to mention this in the presentation, but this would be the newest project that we're starting to receive requests for. Was the this application was the funding for reprinting of a published book. But the reprint, the profits of the reprint were going to the author, which the committee had difficulty with. We received the next year, we received a revamped application that required, it was for the publication of a book. But, it was
so this scene doesn't open for another half hour.
Just gonna mute. It was for the printing of a book, but it was based on the archival material that we had, and the profits of that book were going directly to the institution. So I believe that was Indian Head, correct, Gloria?
I think so.
They printed up a couple books, they sold it in their gift shop, and the profits of that book went back to to the archival department of the museum.
So I guess each case is kind of individual. It just depends on the circumstances.
Correct. Yeah. And if probably if we thinking about it going back is that if the committee had an issue with the profits going to it, they might have just come back with questions of clarification. And if they were satisfied that the profits were going to the institution, they would have approved it. But the profits were going to the author. Okay.
I have another question. It occurs to me when you're going to apply for a matching grant. The one you mentioned was that was a service club youth grant. I don't know if that's the only one that you mentioned in the documentation. But if we are trying to find a youth, are we trying to find somebody who is in a library and archives program?
I've found it's easy. It's probably easiest to just hire somebody, and then work with myself to do basic training. It's too difficult. If you have someone in mind in the
I
library
do.
archive program, great. But if they're not, I don't think there's any issue as long as they're willing to do some training after the fact. And you can probably include that in your background research and finding aid production in your timeline. Does that make sense, Carl?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Yeah, we had one institution who applied and said, "Oh yeah, we're going to hire this person," and they hired this person, but they got a month into the project, and this person got a job offer that they just couldn't refuse, and so left, and so and the institution couldn't find what they considered a qualified person to replace them. And so I was more than willing to work with the person that they did hire, even if they're not qualified to just complete the project. Okay, so Gloria, do you want to stop the recording?
I was just putting that in the chat for you. I will do that.